Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. In Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 282, the next one that we're on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ مُسَمًّى فَاكْتُبُوهُ. You believe, when you transact with some type of debt or some type of loan to a specific period, then make sure you write it down. So this is known as Ayatul Dain. This is the verse that talks about writing down a debt or like a loan. You loan somebody money and they owe you money, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, make sure you write it down. And of course there's some exceptions, and this is a high recommendation. But one of the unique things about this verse in the Quran, it's not done by the way, it's longer. One of the unique things about this verse in the Quran, it's verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Can anyone tell me what's the one unique thing besides you? Can anyone tell me what's the one unique thing about this surah that makes it special and something different throughout the verse of the Quran, except you two? You're the only two except it, and you two. Anyone else? Yes. It's what? Palindrome? No. It's really hard to make a palindrome. This is the longest ayah in the whole Quran. There's no ayah longer than this. The ayah is one entire page. So this is a very important lesson. The scholars explain this. Say, you know what? And I'm not going to go through the whole verse for you. It's just one verse. It's a whole page. It's the longest ayah in the Quran. And what's the subject matter? What's the topic? Writing down a debt. Writing down a loan. And there's a wisdom behind that. Because if you think about it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say that when it comes to things like this is so important. You may think it's something small. I let somebody borrow $50, not a big deal. But if you've ever met somebody, or if you've ever yourself been ripped off by your Muslim brother or by your Muslim sister, if you've ever been in business with your friend and something happened, if you ever went in business with your family member and they went and they took some money from you, you know exactly what that did to your relationship. You know that it destroyed it. You know that it's very hard to mend those relationships back. And there are people who either forget, and there are people who will wrong and oppress other people. Here we're talking about a debt. We're talking about money. We look at the oppression that's taking place in the world today. We look at people who have been killed and massacred by the thousands. What's happening to the people of Gaza? What's been happening to the people of Syria for over a decade? And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has seemingly brought victory. Alhamdulillah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should be wise and we should be cautious. But we should always thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what we get. But we should always continue to make dua to Allah. Because Allah, as we've seen in situations in Egypt and other countries and other places, situations change. Sometimes what we see, it's not always the way that it actually is. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect and preserve all the people who are being oppressed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring peace and justice to the people of Syria. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this regime change a change that is going to bring people's hearts towards Islam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this development in that part of the world something where people are able to practice Islam openly and freely and establish iqamatud deen, establish the deen and the religion in this land and in this part of the world and in this world today. So this is something extremely important. We have to understand people wrong each other all the time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to put mechanisms in place to prevent the injustice from happening, at least to curb it or to limit it. So if you ever take a loan, or if you ever give a loan to somebody else, make sure you have witnesses. Make sure you write it down. Don't take this as something small, because later on, if you experience injustice later on, you will realize that, I should have taken some precautions prior to this happening. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of wisdom. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of justice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people who never wrong anybody else. And may Allah make us people who are protected from being wronged as well. Ameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum.